I want you to imagine a moment that feels very familiar, yet is rarely noticed. A quiet evening, a room without noise, no one asking you to become anything else. Not an empty silence, but a silence that is present. As if life pauses for one breath, not to judge you, not to fix you, but to listen. In that moment, I learned a simple yet profound truth. Life does not wait for you to be good enough before responding. Life responds to what you are quietly confirming as true. I share this with you not as a theologian, but as someone who has watched this law work again and again in human lives. Not through miracles, but through principle. Words are not just passing sounds on the lips. Words are inner commands. What you speak out loud and what you whisper inside are instructions sent into the creative flow of the mind. Many people believe power lives in circumstances, in other people, in luck. But I have seen, and you can see too, that real power lives in a much quieter place. It lives in what you believe to be true about yourself and about life. When you speak something with conviction, whether large or small, you are setting a mold. And life with absolute loyalty will pour into that mold a matching form. This is not advice to always speak positively or paint reality in bright colors. This is an invitation to return to deep honesty with yourself. Because there is no neutral speech. Every sentence you repeat, every conclusion you hold in your heart is a seed. The mind is like fertile soil. It does not argue with the seed. It does only one thing. It grows it. I have met people who constantly say that life is against them. And strangely, life always finds a way to prove them right. I have also met people who are not loud, not dramatic about their faith, but inside them lives a quiet certainty that things will be guided. And life has responded by opening doors at the right time. Not because they were more deserving than others, but because they spoke a different word and stood firmly within it. Prayer in its deepest meaning is not asking. Prayer is recognition. It is speaking what you know to be true at a level deeper than circumstances. When you speak from that place, you are not trying to convince life. You are aligning yourself with the law by which life moves. And that law does not take sides, does not judge, does not delay because of emotion. It simply reflects back what you accept as your truth. Perhaps you are tired of trying. Perhaps you have already asked enough. If so, I invite you to pause for a moment. You do not need to do anything more. Simply listen to the voice inside you during the most ordinary moments. When you wake up, when you are tired, when you feel disappointed. What you say to yourself in those moments carries the greatest weight. I am not here to tell you to change everything today. I only want you to realize that even in this very moment you are speaking some word about your life. And that word is being heard. When you understand this, fear is no longer necessary. Because if words can create old molds, they can also open new ones. And every healing journey, every new direction begins right here. There is something very subtle that many people miss when talking about words and their power. Most of the words that shape your life are never spoken in front of anyone. They are spoken in silence, in moments with no audience, in your mind when you first wake up, when you are tired, when things do not go as expected. It is there that the words with real weight are formed. You may speak beautiful sentences to others, but if inside you keep repeating an old conclusion, that conclusion is the one in control. Not because you are weak, but because the law of the mind works with what is repeated most often and believed most deeply. The mind is not persuaded by short-term effort. It responds to habit. Look back at an ordinary day in your life. Not a day when you try to be positive. A day when you live on autopilot. When a small obstacle appears, what is your first inner reaction? Do you quietly say that this always happens to you? Do you conclude that you are not lucky enough? Do you tell yourself that things will fall apart anyway? These sentences come so quickly that you may think they are harmless reactions. But no reaction is harmless when it is repeated every day. The mind is like loyal soil. It does not judge whether a statement is right or wrong. It does not ask if you truly want it. It simply records it. Then it begins its work of organizing life to match what you have spoken. This is why many people live in a loop without understanding why. They speak the same sentence, expect a different result, then feel disappointed when the old result returns. What matters here is not what you said in the past. What matters is what you are saying now and how often you say it. Each time you repeat a sentence, you deepen that path in the mind. Then life simply follows the path that has already been created. This is not a call to control every thought. That would only create more tension. This is an invitation to awareness. Awareness without judgment. Awareness with curiosity and kindness. When you hear a familiar sentence arise in your mind, instead of believing it, immediately pause for one breath. Just one. And ask where this sentence comes from. Is it truly truth, or is it an old habit speaking for you? Many conclusions we carry were never consciously chosen. They were learned from family environment or unhealed failures. But what has been learned can be learned again. Not through force, but through gradual replacement. Each time you do not repeat the old sentence, you weaken it. And each time you choose a new sentence, even a simple one, you begin to set a different mold. A new sentence does not need to be perfect. It only needs to be true at your current level of belief. If you cannot say that everything is fine, you can say that you are learning how to move through this. If you cannot say that you are completely at peace, you can say that you are finding your way back to stability. What matters is not excitement, but consistency. You may notice that on different days you speak very different sentences depending on your mood. That is normal. But if you want lasting change, observe which sentence appears most often. Not when you are strongest, but when you are most tired. That sentence is guiding more of your decisions than you realize. When you begin to see this, a small freedom appears. You are no longer a victim of unconscious words. You become someone who can choose. Not choose once and be done, but choose again whenever needed. And each time you choose again, even quietly, you are telling life that a new direction is being set. Here I want to pause and ask you something. In recent days, is there a sentence you have been repeating to yourself most often? A sentence about work, money, relationships, or about who you are. You do not need to answer anyone. Just be honest with yourself. And if you are willing, you may leave a very small sign, just one letter or one number, to show that you are listening and reflecting. Thank you for being present until this point. Not everyone has the patience to pause and look at things that seem small, but hold great influence. This presence itself is already a first step of change. If you continue with this line of reflection, you will slowly see that not every situation needs to be fixed immediately. Some things only need to be understood differently. And when understanding shifts, words shift, and the direction of life begins to change as well, quietly but surely. There is a very common misunderstanding I have seen in many sincere and well-intentioned people. They believe that prayer is an outward action. They think they are speaking to a distant power, trying to persuade, trying to move something, trying to make something happen. But prayer, in its deepest meaning, is not an act of reaching outward. It is an act of standing firm, standing within a truth that is higher than the immediate circumstances. When you pray this way, you are not in the position of someone asking. You are in the position of someone recognizing. You are not saying, I hope this will happen. You are saying, I know what is true at a deeper level of life. And the difference between these two positions is significant. The one who asks always carries the fear of being denied. The one who recognizes does not. The one who asks looks at circumstances to see if there is hope. The one who recognizes looks at principle to know how something can be expressed. I want you to see that affirmative prayer is not about speaking louder, not about repeating more often, not about forcing belief. It is about inner alignment. When you speak something, and your whole inner being stands with it, those words carry weight. Not because they are spoken with a formal tone, but because they are spoken from a place without doubt. Many people pray while still arguing inside themselves. One part says this is true, another part whispers maybe it is not. And the law of the mind, which is absolutely loyal, responds to what is repeated more often and what feels more real. That is usually not what you say out loud, but what you carry with you throughout the day. Affirmative prayer is not about denying what you are experiencing. It does not ask you to pretend that pain does not exist or that problems are not real. It only asks you to place truth in its proper position. Circumstances are real at the level of expression, but they are not the ultimate cause. The cause lives deeper where thoughts and beliefs were formed long before. When you pray by affirmation, you are speaking from the level of cause, not from the level of result. Imagine someone standing before a fast-moving river. If that person only begs the river to stop, they will feel powerless. But if they understand where the water comes from, they will look upstream. Affirmative prayer is the act of going upstream. It does not fight the flow. It changes the source. I have seen many people speak the right words on the surface, but inside they remain in a posture of waiting. Waiting to see if this works. Waiting to see if life responds. That posture weakens the words. Because the law does not respond to testing. It responds to conviction, not perfection, but a clear inner position. This explains why urgent pleas sometimes do not bring corresponding change. Not because you are unheard, but because you are speaking from lack. And lack, even when spoken as prayer, is still an instruction sent into the law. The law does not interpret intention. It reflects state. Affirmative prayer invites you into a completely different role. It invites you to step out of the identity of one who lacks and into the identity of one who recognizes a greater truth. Not to escape reality, but to reposition yourself within it. When you say there is guidance, you are not saying this because you see the whole path, but because you know that life moves through order, not chaos. You can begin very simply. No long sentences. No big concepts. Just one sentence you can stand with. One sentence that does not require tension to say. For example, I am being guided step by step. Or there is an order forming even if I cannot see it clearly. These sentences do not deny difficulty, but they place difficulty in its proper role. Not as a ruler, but as a phase. What matters is that you do not speak these sentences as an experiment. You speak them as a choice. I choose to stand in this truth rather than the old conclusion. And each time you choose this way, you are gently but firmly retraining your mind. At first, you may feel like you are only saying these words to feel less anxious. That is fine. The mind learns through repetition, not through debate. If you stand with one sentence long enough, it will gradually become your natural position. And when your inner position changes, the way you see everything begins to change as well. Not because circumstances have already shifted, but because you are no longer standing in the same place. Affirmative prayer does not separate from daily life. It does not happen only in quiet moments. It continues when you face a difficult email, a tense phone call, or unexpected news. In each moment, you are invited again to choose where you speak from. From old fear or from the truth you are learning to stand with. I am not saying this is easy, but I am saying it is simple. And there is a deep difference between simple and easy. Simple means clear. Clear that each time you speak from conviction, even a small one, you are strengthening a new direction. And that direction, if held long enough, will begin to be reflected back by life in very practical ways. If you feel that you have asked enough and are still tired, perhaps it is time to try something different. Not asking more, but standing more firmly. Not finding better words, but finding a clearer inner position. When you do that, your words stop being an effort. They become a partnership with a law that has always been at work. There is one important point that, if misunderstood, can cause many people to lose heart on the journey of healing and realigning their lives. It is misunderstanding how the law of the mind works. Many people believe that if emotion is strong enough, intense enough, painful enough, or desperate enough, life must respond. But the law does not respond to emotional intensity. The law responds to clarity. Emotions can be very real, but not every emotion is creative. Panic can be intense, but it does not create order. Despair can be deep, but it does not set a clear mold. The law of the mind is not pity, and it does not punish. It simply reflects the state you hold consistently. I have met people who prayed through tears, repeating the same request for many years, yet deep inside, they still believed that life is hard, that they must endure, that things rarely flow smoothly. Then they wondered why nothing changed. Not because they were insincere, but because they were sending two different instructions. Their words reached upward, but their quiet belief pulled downward. The law will always respond to the more stable instruction. The clarity I am speaking of is not rigid certainty. It does not require you to know every step ahead. Clarity simply means knowing where you are standing. Are you speaking from fear or from trust? Are you reacting or choosing? When you speak a sentence from a place of clarity, even a very short one, it carries more weight than many words spoken in confusion. The law does not need to be persuaded. It does not need reminders. It does not need strong emotional displays. It was already working long before you noticed it. Your task is not to make the law pay attention, but to adjust your inner position to match how the law operates. When you stand in the right place, response happens naturally. This explains why some people speak very little about their faith, yet their lives gradually move into order. Not because they are luckier, but because inside them there is a consistent direction. They do not say one thing and then cancel it with 10 other thoughts. They do not constantly check to see if things have changed yet. They choose a position and remain there. Anxious waiting weakens words, not because the words are wrong, but because waiting keeps questioning what was just spoken. Each time you say something and immediately doubt it, the mold becomes unclear. The law does not know which mold to fill. And when the mold is unclear, the form that appears is chaotic. You do not need to remove your emotions to have clarity. Instead, you need to see them clearly and place them correctly. Emotions are signals, not commanders. They show you what you are believing, but they do not decide what you must continue believing. When you understand this, you stop fearing your emotions. You can feel sad without declaring that life is sad. You can feel worried without concluding that everything will fall apart. Clarity begins with very small choices. When an old thought appears, you do not need to argue with it. You simply do not stand with it anymore. You choose a different sentence, a different position. For example, I do not know how everything will unfold, but I know there is an order at work. This sentence does not deny emotion, but it places you on the side of principle rather than chaos. When you practice this long enough, you begin to see that the law is not something distant. It is not somewhere outside daily life. It is present in every small reaction, every passing sentence, every conclusion you assume to be obvious. And when you choose clarity over intensity, you are learning to work with the law rather than against it. This part is not meant to push you to control yourself. It simply invites you to become familiar with a different way of standing, a way that is calmer, less dramatic, but far more stable. When you stand there, you no longer have to force belief. Trust begins to feel natural. And from that state, your words carry weight without needing to be raised. If you wish, we can continue to the next part, where I will speak about quiet inner speech, unconscious murmurs, and how you can choose again right in this moment. There is a layer of speech, even quieter than thought, and this is the place where the law of the mind listens most closely. These are the words you speak when no one is there to hear. Very small murmurs, almost whispers, when you are tired, when you are disappointed, when things do not go according to plan. I call these unconscious words. You may not remember what you said in those moments, but the mind remembers clearly. It records each small conclusion as a valid instruction. When you sigh and say that this always happens to you, the mind does not hear a temporary complaint. It hears a description of how life works. Then, it begins to make that description more familiar. What confuses many people is that they do not intentionally create these words. They appear automatically, like an old habit. But every habit was once learned. And what has been learned can be changed, not through self-blame, but through awareness. The moment you hear an old sentence arise in your mind, you already have a chance to choose again. Choosing again does not mean denying what you feel. You can still be tired, still feel sad, still feel discouraged. But you do not need to seal that feeling with a permanent conclusion. You can say today, I am tired, instead of saying I am always exhausted by this life. These two sentences sound similar, but their impact is completely different. I have seen many people begin to change not through big decisions, but by stopping in the middle of a familiar sentence. They are about to say this never gets better, and then they pause. Not to force optimism, but to stop reinforcing an old mold. Even such a small pause is enough to weaken the weight of the old words. The law of the mind does not require perfect sentences. It only needs a new consistency. Each time you do not repeat the old sentence, you remove some energy from it. And each time you choose a different sentence, even a modest one, you place a brick for a new direction. These bricks are quiet, but they form a foundation. What matters is that you do not wait until you feel better to change your words. Often emotions shift only after words have shifted long enough. If you wait for emotion to lead, you will return to the old path quickly. But if you choose words as your anchor, emotion will gradually learn the new direction. Right now, you can try something very simple. Just recall one sentence you often repeat to yourself when things do not go well. No need to analyze, no need to fix it immediately. Just recognize it. And the moment you recognize it, you step out of unconsciousness. That is the moment when choice returns to your hands. I invite you to mark this moment. If you feel that you have recognized an old sentence that has been quietly guiding you, you can leave a very small sign. You can comment that you are ready to change, or simply leave the number 1. Not to prove anything, but to confirm to yourself that you have seen it and you are choosing differently. Thank you for being present and coming this far. Pausing to look at unconscious words requires a quiet kind of courage. And that courage itself is a sign that a new mold is beginning to take shape. If you wish, we can continue to the next part, where I will speak more clearly about thoughts as molds and circumstances as forms, so you no longer see your current life as a verdict, but as a trace that can be changed. There is a very different way to look at circumstances that, once understood, can greatly lighten the weight you carry inside. I invite you to see your current life not as a verdict, but as a trace. A trace left by mental molds that were held long enough in the past. Circumstances do not arise on their own. They do not appear randomly to test or punish you. They are forms shaped from an invisible mold that already existed in the mind. When you see this, you no longer need to ask why this is happening to me. You begin to ask a gentler and more opening question. Which mold created this form? Thought is the mold. Circumstance is the form. The mold always comes before the form. But because we only see the form, we assume the form is the cause. We try to fix the form by pushing, pulling, resisting, or enduring. And then we become tired. not because there is no way out, but because we are working at the wrong level. I am not saying you should ignore what is happening. If there are bills to pay, you pay them. If there is a conversation that needs to happen, you have it. But alongside these necessary actions, you need to understand that what determines the long-term direction is not the current form, but the mold you hold inside each day. Many people live in a loop without realizing it. They see a result, then, from that result, they draw a conclusion. From that conclusion, they form a belief. And from that belief, they create actions and reactions that lead to a similar result. This loop continues, and slowly it is called reality. But that reality is only a reinforced habit. When you understand that a mold can be changed, you no longer need to fear the current form. You can look at it directly without panic. You can say, "This is the form of an old mold. It is completing its cycle, and I do not need to keep pouring material into this mold anymore." Changing the mold does not happen through a dramatic decision. It happens through very small but steady choices. Each time you do not draw a familiar conclusion from a situation, you soften the old mold. Each time you choose a slightly different way of seeing, you begin shaping a new mold. You can start by observing your first reaction when a repeated situation appears. If you used to say things are always like this, today you can pause and say, "This is happening, but it does not define my entire life." This sentence is not for comfort. It is a technical action. It stops you from continuing to pour material into the old mold. What matters is that you do not need to see the new mold fully formed right away. No one asks you to know exactly what you want in the distant future. You only need to know that you no longer want to keep the old mold. That choice alone already creates space. And in that space, something new has room to form. When you work with the mold instead of fighting the form, you will notice very practical changes. You react less. You feel less exhausted. You no longer need to prove whether you are right or wrong. You simply focus on holding a clearer inner direction. And from that direction, your outer decisions become wiser as well. I want you to understand that no mold is permanent. A mold exists only as long as you keep pouring the same material into it. When you stop, the mold begins to lose its force. And when the mold loses force, a new form, even if not yet clear, begins to have a chance to appear. You do not need to hurry. The law is not rushed. It responds to steadiness, not urgency. Each day you hold a new mold, even through a single different sentence or a slightly different perspective. You are working at the level of cause. And working at the level of cause is always much gentler than struggling at the level of results. If you wish, in Part 7, I will guide you deeper into observing unconscious molds formed from the past, from family, from old experiences, so you can recognize them without blaming yourself. There is an important truth that, if not seen clearly, can lead you back into self-blame each time you recognize an old mental mold. The truth is this: most of the molds operating within you were not created intentionally. They were formed very early, very naturally, as a way to adapt and survive. When you were young, you observed the adults around you. You heard how they spoke about money-work relationships and about themselves. You did not memorize their exact words, but you absorbed the emotional climate they lived in. If you grew up in constant worry, you learned that worry was normal. If you grew up in lack, you learned to be cautious and defensive. Those lessons were not wrong at the time. They helped you survive, but what helps you survive does not always help you grow. Many people carry these molds their entire lives without realizing it. They believe it is simply who they are. I am someone who worries. I am practical. I am unlucky. But these are not essence. They are conclusions repeated long enough to feel familiar, and what feels familiar is often mistaken for truth. I want you to look at these molds with compassion, not judgment. They once had a reason to exist. They protected you in the best way they knew how. But you are no longer living in the old conditions. And any mold that no longer fits does not need to continue directing your life. To recognize unconscious molds, you do not need to revisit every painful memory. You only need to observe small expectations in daily life. When you open your banking app, what is your first inner response? When your phone rings, do you expect good news or bad news? When you walk into your workplace, do you prepare for cooperation or tension? These expectations are not random thoughts. They are echoes of molds that were set long ago. What is subtle is that you often call these expectations reality, but the reality you experience is largely the reality of anticipation. You anticipate something, you prepare for it, you react according to it. Then life simply follows the script that was already written. Not because life is against you, but because a part of the story was written unconsciously in advance. When you begin to see this, an important shift occurs. You stop asking why you think this way. You start asking what you are relearning. You do not try to erase the old mold by force. You simply stop believing that it is the only truth. You may notice that you always expect to struggle to be worthy, or that you must endure in order to be loved, or that good things are fragile and easily lost. These molds are not your fault. But if you do not recognize them, you will continue to live as if they are unchangeable laws. Observing unconscious molds requires gentle honesty. Not the kind that criticizes, but the kind an adult uses to look at old habits with understanding. When a mold appears, you can quietly say, "This is how I once learned to see life." Then you can ask a very important question. Does this way of seeing still serve me today? That question does not need an immediate answer. Simply asking it creates a small opening in the old mold, and in that opening a different way of seeing can begin to form. You do not need to know exactly what you want to believe instead. You only need to be willing not to automatically believe the old conclusion anymore. Many people fear that without the old mold, they will become careless, unrealistic, or out of control. But in reality, the opposite often happens. When you are no longer controlled by an old mold, you become more alert. You stop reacting from outdated fear. You begin choosing from the present instead of from memory. Recognizing unconscious molds does not make you weaker. It makes you mature. You stop living like a child, reacting to the world based on old lessons. You begin living as someone who has the right to review what they believe. And that right is one of the greatest forms of human power. During this process, you may feel slightly disoriented. When the old mold loosens and the new one is not yet clear, you stand in between. This is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of transition. At this stage, what matters is not having a strong new belief immediately. What matters is not returning to the old mold simply because it feels familiar. You can say to yourself, "I am learning to see life from a different place. I do not know clearly yet, but I am opening." These sentences do not promise anything dramatic, but they create a safe space for something new to appear. As you remain patient with this process, you will gradually notice that old expectations lose their grip. You no longer assume that everything will be difficult. You stop preparing for disappointment before it arrives. And you may be surprised to see yourself responding differently in familiar situations. Not because you are trying harder, but because the inner mold has begun to change. In the next part, I will speak about consistency. Not rigid discipline, but the inner climate you create each day. This is the factor that determines whether a new mold becomes stable enough to take shape. There is a very common misunderstanding about inner change. Many people believe they need iron discipline, total control over every thought and every emotion in order to create a new direction. But lasting change does not come from tension. It comes from the inner climate you live in each day. The inner climate is not a single thought. It is the sum of repeated thoughts, familiar sentences, and quiet expectations you carry from morning to night. Like weather, it is not created by one strong gust of wind. It is created by steadiness. And the law of the mind responds to climate, not to sudden emotional moments. I want you to understand that the consistency I am speaking of is not about always being positive. No one lives that way. Consistency means having a clear enough inner direction to return to even when you drift. You can feel sad, you can doubt, you can feel tired, but you do not let those states define your entire reality. You have another place to stand and come back to. Many people give up too early because they measure change by temporary feelings. One day they feel good and believe they are on the right path. The next day they feel discouraged and think they have failed. But the law does not move by emotional rhythm. It moves by trend, and a trend can only be seen over time. When you begin forming a new mold, the old ones do not disappear right away. They still show up, still speak, still try to pull you back to familiar paths. This does not mean you are doing something wrong. It only means the old mold was fed for a long time. And anything that was fed for long needs time to lose strength. Consistency here does not mean never returning to old thoughts. Consistency means that each time you notice yourself returning, you choose again. No self-blame, no drama, just choosing again. It is this repeated choosing that creates a new climate. I often say, the mind is like a room. If you open the door to light once and then close it, the room quickly becomes dark again. But if each day you open the door, a little light slowly becomes normal. You do not need to open it wide at the beginning. You only need to open it regularly. A sign that you are creating consistency is not that you always feel good. The sign is that you react differently to familiar situations. Things that once made you panic now cause you to slow down. Situations that once led you to quick conclusions now invite you to observe. That is real change, even if it happens quietly. You do not need to track how many % you have changed. Doing that only pulls you back into old control patterns. What you need is to keep an inner climate gentle enough for something new to grow. That climate is shaped by the sentences you allow yourself to repeat, the perspectives you choose to maintain, and the expectations you no longer assume automatically. When the climate changes, the new mold begins to stabilize. And when the mold stabilizes, outer forms will begin to adjust. Not immediately, but surely, because the law misses nothing. It responds to whatever is held long enough. This part does not ask you to do anything dramatic. It simply invites you to be more patient with your own process. When you understand that change is a matter of climate, you rush less, doubt yourself less, and give up less often. If you wish, we can continue to the next part, where I will speak about the role of emotion, why emotion is not the enemy, but also not the driver, and how you can use emotion as energy in a balanced way. There is something very easy to misunderstand when we talk about emotion. Many people believe that emotion is the problem, something that must be removed, overcome, or suppressed in order to live in peace. But emotion is not the enemy. The issue is not what you feel, but the role you allow emotion to play in your inner life. Emotion was not created to be the driver. It was created to be fuel. It shows you what you are believing. It signals that a certain mold has been activated. When you understand this, you no longer need to fight emotion. You begin to listen to it without handing it the authority to decide. I have seen many people try to change their lives using words alone, while being completely disconnected from emotion. They repeat the right sentences, but inside there is no life. Those words are like seeds falling on dry soil, not because the words are wrong, but because they are not being nourished by the right emotional energy. On the other hand, I have seen people who use no impressive language at all, yet speak very little, and every sentence carries weight. This is because when they speak from a place of calm conviction. No forcing, no begging, no performance. And that inner state is what allows their words to reach the deeper layers of the mind. Strong emotion does not mean correct emotion. Fear can be intense, but it does not create order. Temporary excitement can be high, but it does not create stability. What the law of the mind responds to is not emotional intensity, but alignment between emotion and belief. When these two speak the same message, energy becomes focused. You can recognize this clearly in moments when you truly know something. Not when you hope, but when you know. That state is usually quiet. There is no drama. But inside there is a certainty that does not need proof. This is the type of emotion with the greatest creative power. So your work is not to generate stronger emotion. Your work is to choose an emotion you can stand with, an emotion that does not contradict your words. If you say you are being guided, but inside you are panicking, those two are pulling in opposite directions. Not because you are wrong, but because you are trying to move in two directions at once. Emotion can be adjusted not through force, but through the body. When you change how you breathe, how you sit, how you stand, you send new signals to the nervous system. You are telling the mind that there is no immediate danger right now. As the body softens, emotion becomes less extreme. From there, you can choose words more naturally. This is very important. You cannot speak a new sentence while your entire body is in alarm mode. The law does not listen only to words. It listens to the whole state. That is why sometimes the first step before speaking an affirmation is not finding better words, but breathing deeper, slowing down, and grounding yourself in your body. When emotion is placed in its proper role, it becomes a powerful ally. It supplies energy to the new mold. It gives words life. But when emotion is ignored and left unseen, it will find its own way to express itself, often through unconscious words you do not realize you are speaking. I want you to see that you do not need to wait until emotion becomes completely positive before allowing yourself to speak something new. You only need to choose a sentence that your current emotion does not strongly resist. For example, if you are very anxious, saying everything is perfect may increase tension. But you can say, I am here and I am moving through this step by step. That sentence allows emotion to exist without letting it control the future. As you practice this, you will notice a subtle change. Emotion is no longer a wave that sweeps you away. It becomes a current you can guide. You no longer fear that feeling sad will cause everything to collapse. You understand that emotion is simply energy waiting to be directed. Here I want to pause and ask you something honest. Right now in your life, is there an area where you are carrying the most emotion? It might be money, work, health, or a relationship. When you think of it, what is the first emotion that appears? You do not need to share details. Just notice it. And if you wish, you may leave a very small sign to acknowledge that you are seeing this clearly. Thank you for staying with me until here. Looking directly at your emotions without running away or blaming yourself is a sign of inner maturity. And from this point, you can begin using emotion as a resource rather than letting it become an obstacle. In the next part, I will speak about something equally important. Not that negative emotions are the problem, but that we rehearse them daily without realizing that we are praying in that way. There is a very common mistake people make when they begin practicing conscious speech. They choose sentences that are too far from where they are actually standing. They speak words that sound beautiful and spiritually correct, but inside they cannot stand with those words. When speech goes one way and quiet belief goes another, the inner world becomes divided. Not because you lack faith, but because you move too fast. The law of the mind does not ask you to leap. It only asks you to be real. Real with your current level of belief. Real with the place you are standing today. When you speak a sentence that your whole inner being can agree with, even just enough, that sentence carries far more power than a perfect sentence filled with doubt. I have seen many people say they want abundance, but each time they say it, their chest tightens. Not because abundance is wrong, but because an old mold inside them still links abundance with danger, risk, or insecurity. In that case, forcing yourself to say, "I am abundant," only adds tension. The mind resists not because it is against you, but because it is trying to protect you in the old way. A wiser approach is to find a sentence that sits right at the edge of your current belief. Not in the old place, but not too far ahead. For example, instead of saying, "I am wealthy," you might say, "I am learning to trust the flow of enough." Instead of saying, "I am completely at peace," you might say, "I am finding stability, step by step." These sentences do not create resistance. They create movement. What matters is how your body feels when you say the sentence. If you speak it and your body softens, your breath slows, that is a sign the sentence fits. If you speak it and feel tension, you may have chosen something too high for the current step. There is nothing wrong with that. You simply step back one level. The mind learns in layers. It does not like being pulled away from familiar ground too suddenly. When you choose a sentence that fits, you are building a bridge. Each time you stand on that bridge, it becomes stronger. And when it is strong enough, you cross naturally without forcing. Many people skip this step because they want fast change, but fast change rarely lasts. The law is not impressed by speed. It responds to stability. One sentence spoken daily with a matching inner feeling slowly becomes a new belief. And when a new belief forms, you will find yourself speaking stronger sentences naturally without effort. There is a clear sign that you are moving at the right pace. You no longer have to remind yourself to believe. The sentence begins to appear naturally in ordinary moments. When something difficult happens, you naturally think that you can handle it step by step. When something is unclear, you no longer rush to negative conclusions. This is when the new mold begins to replace the old one. You do not need to erase all old sentences at once. You simply stop giving them absolute authority. When an old sentence appears, you can acknowledge it and place a new sentence beside it. No arguing, no rejection. Just allowing the new sentence to exist at the same time. Over time, the sentence that is nourished more becomes the main voice. Choosing sentences that match your current belief also helps you avoid unnecessary disappointment. You stop asking why nothing has changed yet. You understand that you are building a foundation, and foundations take time to become solid. When you understand this, you rush less and doubt yourself less. I want you to remember that no affirmation is permanent. A sentence that fits today may no longer fit later. As your belief expands, you will naturally need different words. This does not mean the old sentence was wrong. It simply means you have grown, and as you grow, your inner language needs to mature with you. Most of all, do not turn this practice into a test. You do not need to be right. You only need to be honest. Each fitting sentence is a step, and many small steps repeated long enough will carry you to a place very different from where you are standing now. In the next part, I will speak about something very subtle, yet powerful: how we unconsciously rehearse fear, resentment, and self-pity as a kind of reversed prayer without realizing it, and how you can stop feeding energy into those molds. There is something very subtle that, if unnoticed, will keep old molds alive even after you understand the law. It is the habit of rehearsing negative emotion every day. I am not saying fear, resentment, or sadness are wrong. I am saying that when they are repeated with the same story, the same tone, the same conclusion, they become a kind of reversed prayer without you realizing it. Each time you retell an injustice from the same viewpoint, you recharge the old mold. Each time you revisit a failure without adding a new perspective, you keep that mold warm and active. The law does not distinguish between prayer and complaint. It only records repeated energy and organizes life to match it. This may feel uncomfortable at first because it touches a very human habit. We often believe that if we analyze pain long enough, we will move past it. But many times analysis becomes a refined form of rehearsal. You are no longer in a moment of healing. You are in a moment of reinforcement. I want you to clearly see the difference between feeling and rehearsing. Feeling is allowing emotion to pass through without attaching a permanent verdict to it. Rehearsing is repeating the same story until it becomes identity. When you say, "I feel sad right now," you are feeling. When you say, "I am always abandoned," you are rehearsing. These two lead in completely different directions. You do not need to forbid yourself from feeling anger or sadness, but you do need to notice what you are saying to that emotion. Are you turning it into proof for an old conclusion? Or are you allowing it to exist without giving it authority over the future? This difference matters deeply. One of the strongest ways to stop rehearsing is to bring the body into the process. When you notice yourself entering a familiar emotional loop, do not rush to change the word. Pause and adjust your breathing. Place your feet on the ground. Relax your shoulders. This is not a relaxation technique. It is a signal to the nervous system that there is no immediate survival threat. When the nervous system settles, the inner story loses strength. Once the emotion loosens its grip, you can choose your words again. No perfect sentence is required. Just one sentence that does not keep charging the old mold. For example, instead of saying "this always happens to me," you can say, "this is happening, and I am learning to respond differently." This does not deny difficulty. It removes the authority of a permanent conclusion. I want you to understand that each time you do not rehearse old emotion in the old way, you are doing something important. You are cutting the power supply to the old mold. The mold does not collapse immediately, but it weakens. And when it weakens, a new mold can begin to grow without constant competition. Many people think they must replace negative emotion entirely with positive emotion. This rarely works. Forced emotion finds its way back. What works better is shifting from rehearsal to guidance. You do not push emotion away. You tell it, "I see you, and we are not letting you write tomorrow's script." There is a clear sign that you are no longer rehearsing. You stop needing to retell the old story to others to feel relief. You notice that repeating the story makes you heavier, not lighter. And you naturally choose more silence, not from suppression, but because you no longer want to feed what does not serve you. This is a major step of inner maturity. It is quiet. No one applauds, but it changes your inner climate deeply. When you stop rehearsing fear, resentment, and self-pity, you release a large amount of energy. That energy does not disappear. It returns as clarity, presence, and the ability to choose differently. I want to pause here and invite you to make a very small commitment. Not to me, but to yourself. If you feel you have recognized an emotion or story you have been rehearsing for too long, you may leave a small sign. You may write that you are ready to change, or simply the number 1. Not to promise you will never return to that emotion, but to acknowledge that you have seen it and are choosing to learn how to guide rather than be carried away. Thank you for being present and coming this far. Recognizing how you have unknowingly prayed through old emotion requires honesty and courage. And that honesty is the foundation for a stronger new mold. In the next part, I will speak more clearly about the neutral and precise nature of the law of the mind. Because when you understand that the law does not reward or punish, does not judge you as good or bad, you stop blaming yourself and begin working with the law in a more peaceful way. There is one truth that, when truly understood, allows many burdens of self-blame to fall away. It is this: The law of the mind does not reward, punish, or judge you as good or bad. The law has no personal emotion. It does not remember your past to punish you, and it does not evaluate whether you are worthy. The law does only one thing. It reflects what you believe to be true with precision and loyalty. Many people grow up believing that if they try hard enough, behave well enough, or endure long enough, life will reward them with good outcomes. When that does not happen, they turn inward with blame or disappointment. But this way of seeing makes you work with the law through emotion, not understanding. The law does not respond to moral effort. It responds to clarity of belief. Imagine a mirror. The mirror does not dislike you when you are tired. It does not favor you when you are joyful. It simply reflects what stands before it. If the image in the mirror is not what you want, you do not argue with the mirror. You do not ask the mirror to change. You change what stands in front of it. The law of the mind works in the same way. When you understand this, you stop asking why this is happening to me. That question often carries a sense of victimhood. Instead, you begin to ask what you are believing that life is reflecting back. This question is not about blame. It is about restoring authorship. Many people carry a subtle sense of guilt. They believe that if their life is not working, they must have done something wrong. But the law does not operate by that logic. It does not care how many times you prayed or how many books you read. It responds to the belief climate you live in each day. When you stop attaching morality to outcomes, you begin working with causes. You no longer try to become a better person to earn a reward. You become clearer in thought to create a different mold. This shift brings great peace. The law is not against you. It is not for you either. It stands with consistency. Whatever is held long enough, steadily enough, and sincerely enough in the mind will be reflected. When you understand this, you stop fearing mistakes. A mistake does not ruin you. Only unconscious repetition strengthens an unwanted mold. This also means you do not need to be perfect. You can have days of doubt and moments of hesitation. The law does not erase a new mold because of one weak moment. It looks at the overall direction, and if your direction is shifting even slowly, the law shifts with you. When you stop blaming yourself, you release a great deal of energy. That energy is no longer spent on self-judgment. It becomes available for observation, adjustment, and choice. And from this calm state, you can work with the law effectively, without tension, without fear, without drama. The law of the mind is neutral, but that does not make it cold. Its neutrality is what allows you to begin again at any moment. No permission is needed. No need to be good enough. The moment you change your inner position, the law receives a new instruction. When this truly settles and a clear lightness appears, you no longer feel watched or evaluated by life. You understand that life is reflecting, not judging. And in that understanding, you begin to treat yourself with more gentleness, more clarity, and a more mature sense of responsibility. In the next part, I will speak about a very subtle obstacle. When a person wants change and fears change at the same time, a state I call divided desire. When you understand and release this, many delays begin to dissolve naturally. There is a very subtle obstacle on the path of change that many people do not notice yet. It is the source of much delay and frustration. It is the state of wanting and fearing at the same time. I call this divided desire. One part of you genuinely wants a different life. Another part whispers that change is dangerous, uncertain, and may lead to loss. When these two parts exist without being recognized, you may feel as if you are trying very hard but getting nowhere. You speak new words, yet your behavior and reactions return to old patterns. Not because you are weak, but because you are pressing the accelerator and the brake at the same time. The law of the mind cannot respond clearly when instructions are conflicted. I want you to understand that this fearful part is not your enemy. It is a part that once learned that safety comes from what is familiar. It does not care whether you are happy. It cares whether you survive. And in the past, it did its job well. But as you grow as circumstances change, the old form of protection begins to turn into resistance. Many people try to silence this fearful part with logic or strong declarations. This rarely works. Fear does not need to be defeated. It needs to be heard. When you pause and ask this part what it is trying to protect you from, a softening often occurs. And when softness appears, integration becomes possible. Divided desire often reveals itself in conditional sentences. I want to change, but I believe this is good if I will do it when things feel safer. These words "but" and "if" seem small, but they signal a belief that is not yet unified. The law of the mind hears the whole sentence, not just the first part. To release this state, you do not need to force decisiveness immediately. What you need is gentle clarity. You can say, a part of me is still afraid, and I respect that. And I also choose to move step by step toward what I want. This sentence does not remove fear, but it does not allow fear to hold veto power. A very practical way to work with divided desire is to observe small actions. When you are truly unified inside, you will notice that you act differently without forcing yourself. When you are divided, you will see delay, forgetting, or very reasonable explanations for not acting yet. These signs are not for self-blame, but for awareness. When you notice yourself delaying, do not ask, "Why am I lazy?" or "Why do I lack discipline?" Ask instead, "What am I trying to protect?" This question moves you from self-judgment to self-understanding. And from understanding, you can adjust your approach. Instead of taking a large step that alarms the fearful part, you choose a smaller, safer step that still moves in the same direction. Divided desire also often leads you to constantly seek more information, more methods, more external confirmation. Not because you lack knowledge, but because you are searching for absolute safety before moving. But absolute safety rarely appears before action. It usually appears after you have taken a few steps and realized that you are still okay. When inner unity begins to form, you will notice a subtle shift. You no longer need to push yourself so hard. Energy is no longer pulled backward. Small decisions become easier. You spend less time in inner debate over things that once felt simple. This is a sign that desire is becoming integrated. This integration does not come from removing any part of you. It comes from giving each part its proper place. Fear is listened to, but it does not hold the steering wheel. Desire is allowed to lead, but it does not burn everything behind it. When these parts find a shared rhythm, movement becomes smoother. You do not need to wait until fear is completely gone before you are allowed to move forward. You only need to ensure that fear is no longer the only voice. When you do this, many delays dissolve naturally, not because you try harder, but because you stop blocking yourself. In the next part, I will bring you back to something very ordinary. Daily language, jokes, complaints, and the casual ways you name yourself that seem harmless yet quietly reinforce old molds. There are words you speak every day that you do not consider important. They are spoken as social habits, small jokes to lighten the mood, or ways of making fun of yourself so you do not have to explain more. Yet these words are what keep old molds running most steadily. Not loudly, not dramatically, but consistently. You may say, "I am just joking." But the mind does not understand jokes. It only records content and the emotion attached to it. When you call yourself unlucky, clumsy, or always out of sync, even with laughter, you are giving yourself a label. And a label, when repeated, becomes a mold. Many people use self-mockery as a form of armor. They believe that if they name their own weaknesses, first, others cannot hurt them. That may work on a social level, but at a deeper level, you are teaching your mind, "This is who I am." And the law of the mind, absolutely loyal, will organize life to match that identity. Complaints work in the same way. Just a few familiar lines. It is always me. Life is hard. It is probably like this anyway. These are not neutral descriptions. They are conclusions, and each repeated conclusion reinforces the old mold. What is subtle is that you do not need very negative words to create an effect. A tone of resignation and assumption that things will not improve is enough. The law does not require a tragic story. It only requires consistency. I am not inviting you to become rigid or fearful of your words. I am inviting you to become conscious. When a familiar sentence is about to come out, you can pause for one moment. Not to find a better sentence, but to stop reinforcing what you no longer want to carry. You do not need to correct every sentence immediately. Just begin with the ones you repeat most often. The ones you use to introduce yourself, to explain your life, to justify why you no longer try. Those sentences carry more weight than you realize. You can replace them very gently. No need for strong opposites. For example, instead of saying I am always slow, you can say I am learning to move at my own rhythm. Instead of saying I am unlucky, you can say I am adjusting my direction these days. These sentences are not dramatic, but they open possibility. And possibility is what the old mold always lacked. When you change daily language, you change the inner climate you live in. No one needs to know. No announcements are required. You simply know that you no longer want to name yourself with old labels. And each time you do not use that label, you remove one brick from the old mold. Here, I want to ask you something simple and honest. Is there a sentence you often say about yourself that when you look again no longer feels fair to who you are today? A joke, a complaint, a way of naming yourself. The moment you notice it, you have already begun to separate yourself from that mold. If you wish, you may leave a very small sign to acknowledge that you have seen this. No explanation, no details, just to show that you are listening and choosing to be more conscious with your language. Thank you for walking with me to this part. Looking again at words that seem harmless requires a very quiet kind of honesty. And that subtle honesty is a sign that you are entering a more mature stage in how you work with your mind and your life. In the next part, I will bring you to a very important point: staying rooted. Not forcing effort, but remaining with what you have chosen, even when results are not yet visible. There is a very important moment in any change, and it is not the moment you begin. It is the moment when you have not yet seen results, but you also have not returned to the old path. This moment is very quiet, very easy to overlook, yet it decides everything. I call it staying rooted. Staying rooted is not about forcing yourself to endure. It is not telling yourself that you must believe no matter what. Staying rooted is simply remaining with what you have chosen, even when there is no outer proof to reassure you yet. You do not need to do anything more. You simply do not retreat. Many people turn back after making some progress, not because they lack commitment, but because they interpret life's silence as failure. They say they tried and nothing happened, but the law does not move according to your checking rhythm. It moves according to formation. There is a period where the new mold is being formed while the old form is still visible. During this time, you are not tested by major events, but by very familiar things. An old reaction appears. An old sentence returns. A person or situation invites you to draw the same conclusion as before. This is not a sign that you are on the wrong path. It is a sign that the old mold is trying to keep its place. Staying rooted does not require you to fight these things. It only asks that you do not give control back. When an old sentence appears, you do not need to erase it. You simply do not act from it. When an old emotion arises, you do not need to suppress it. You simply do not let it write the next part of the story. You may feel as if you are walking through fog. Not as clear as when you first started, but not back where you were before. This is a transition stage, and this stage always asks for more patience than inspiration. Not because you are doing something wrong, but because you are moving from the familiar into the new. I want you to understand that not seeing results yet does not mean nothing is happening. Many important changes happen at levels you cannot see. The way you react is different. The way you speak to yourself is softer. Things that once kept you awake now only hold your attention briefly. These are results. They just have not taken the form you are waiting for. Staying rooted also means you do not keep changing direction just because your feelings fluctuate. When you choose a new sentence, a new inner position, give it time. Do not abandon it because one day you feel doubtful. Doubt does not destroy a new mold. Only leaving it too quickly does. Staying rooted is quiet. No one applauds it. But each day you do not return to the old path, you are sending a very clear instruction into the law. I am staying here. I do not need to see immediately in order to keep choosing. And the law, which responds to consistency, begins adjusting factors you cannot control. You may notice that you no longer talk much about changing anymore. You do not need to explain. You do not need to convince anyone. This is a sign that staying rooted is forming. When you are truly rooted, you no longer seek external confirmation. Staying rooted does not mean you never adjust. If you realize a sentence no longer fits, you can choose another. But that adjustment comes from clarity, not panic. You do not jump from one direction to another out of fear of missing something. You move step by step, and you stay long enough for each step to matter. I invite you to look back at the path you have walked through these recent parts. There may not be dramatic outer change, but if you are honest, you will see that you are no longer standing in the same inner place. And that is the most important sign of all. In the final part 16, I will speak to you from a very quiet place. Not to teach anything new, but to gather everything you have heard and bring you back to a very simple truth. You are not searching for strength. You are learning how to remain with the strength that has always been within you. I want to speak to you from a very quiet place. Not a place of theory, not a place of methods, but a place of simple truth that has always been here. You are not searching for strength. You have never lacked it. What you have been learning all along is how to stay with that strength long enough for it to guide you. I have met many people who look for peace as if it exists somewhere else. In a different situation, a different job, a different relationship, a different version of themselves. But peace is not at the end of the road. It is in the place where you stand. And that place has always been available inside you the moment you stop arguing with life and begin listening to what is guiding you from within. Inner strength is not constant excitement or confidence. It is the ability to return to what you have chosen even when you are tired, even when you doubt, even when nothing outside has changed yet. Each time you return in this way, you are reinforcing a deep truth. I am not carried away by every thought. I can choose where I stand. I want you to remember that the law of the mind has never been against you. It has only reflected you. And when you begin to change how you see, how you speak, how you stay with yourself, the law begins to reflect a different world. Not because life favors you more, but because you are giving a different instruction. There may still be very difficult days. There may still be moments when old thoughts return. This does not erase the path you have walked. It only reminds you that you are human. Strength is not never falling. Strength is knowing you can stand up again without punishing yourself. I want you to stop seeing yourself as a project that needs fixing. You are not broken. You simply learned ways of seeing, speaking, and reacting that once fit a different time. And now you are relearning with the clarity of an adult. Relearning with the gentleness of someone who understands that real change does not come from force, but from inner agreement. When you speak a new sentence, not to beg, not to prove, but to stay with what you know is true, you step into the place of a co-creator. Not creating life through personal effort, but through alignment with a greater order that has always been moving beneath all forms. I have spoken a lot about words, thoughts, molds, and forms. But the essence is always simple. Where you place your attention, where you place your agreement, where you place your inner voice each day, that is where life will open. Not immediately, but surely, because the law misses nothing. You do not need to do anything more right now. You do not need to remember everything. You do not need perfect practice. The only thing you need is to remember that you can choose again, right in this moment. Choose a gentler sentence toward yourself. Choose a wider way of seeing your situation. Choose not to stamp a temporary season as permanent. When you do this, even very quietly, you are telling life that you are ready to move from a different place. And life, loyal and precise, will begin to respond from that same place. I do not promise you that everything will be easy, but I know this for certain. When you stop fighting yourself, when you stop speaking words that weaken you, when you stay rooted in what you have chosen, even challenges no longer carry the same weight. They no longer define you. They simply pass through you. Carry this with you as you leave this story. You do not need to become someone else to deserve peace. You only need to stop leaving yourself in difficult moments. Stay. Listen. Choose again. The strength you have been searching for was never outside. It has always been waiting inside you, patiently, quietly, until you were ready to stay with it.